Hello everybody, I'm Riccardo Presotto, a PhD student at Università degli Studi di Milano in Italy and member of the Everywhere Lab. And today I'm here to present you our preliminary results on sensitive data leakage in federated human activity recognition. Let's start to talk about sensor-based human activity recognition, HAR, that has been a hot topic in pervasive computing for many years, as an enabling technology for several context-aware applications, including healthcare and well-being. Currently, the most accurate HAR approaches rely on fully supervised deep learning methods, which are trained in a centralized fashion. However, the deployment of these kind of solutions in real-world scenarios is limited by some issues. Among those problems, privacy is particularly relevant since the data used to train activity recognition models may reveal sensitive information about the users. For example, their personal habits, medical conditions, and so on. A basic solution to tackle this problem may consist of using pseudo-anonymization techniques to avoid malicious third parties to see the identity of the users who generate the activity data. However, as each user generates a specific sensor data patterns while executing the activities, by analyzing the anonymized sensory data, it is still possible to derive the identity of the users who generated them. So in the last few years, federated learning has been proposed as a valuable solution to mitigate those privacy problems. Indeed, the federated learning framework involves that each user shares with a cloud server only the parameters of a locally trained model, while the personal data collected from the user are kept private. So a cloud server is in charge of generating a global model by aggregating the model parameters received from the users. Despite the federated learning framework avoids the release of labeled sensory data, recent studies reveal that the model's parameters received and manipulated by the cloud server may still reveal sensitive information about the users that participate to federated learning. In particular, considering an honest but curious cloud service provider that can associate the received model parameters with the users who generated them, we have to deal with two privacy problems. At first, a cloud service provider may infer private information for a specific user by exploiting the global model parameters or by exploiting the personal model parameters received from that participant. Then a participating user may infer sensitive information about another participant by attacking the global model parameters periodically received by the cloud server. So on the one hand, it is possible to prevent the cloud server to attack personal model parameters by using privacy-preserving solutions like secure multi-party computation that avoid the cloud server to see the individual contributions of the users. However, on the other hand, attacks on the global model are still possible. So, considering the specific activity recognition domain, the potential privacy leakages of federated HAR models have been not studied in deep yet. Indeed, with respect to other well-studied problems like image classification, the sensor-based HAR domain has its peculiarities. So, several new research questions arise in this area. The first research question is it possible to understand from the global model which users participated to FL training? Then we can wonder if it is possible to understand which activities the participating users performed, when, where, and how. A valuable solution to answer those questions may be the membership inference attack, which enables to infer if a specific data sample has been used or not to train a machine learning model. The core element of the membership inference attack is a binary classifier that we call attack model that is trained to determine if a given sample is part or not to the training set of the target model. Precisely, the attack model performs such a classification by analyzing the behavior of the target model in classifying the given samples. For example, such a behavior can be the confidence of the target model while classifying an input sample. Note that in the following of this presentation, we use member to refer to the data classified by the attack model as part of the training set of the target model, and the non-member to refer to the data classified by the attack model as not part of the training set of the target model. Moreover, it is very important to underline that the membership inference attack assumes the access to a portion of the training set of the target model. However, in federated learning, the cloud service provider has no access to the training dataset of the target model, which we recall is generated server-side by aggregating the model's parameters received from the participating users. So in order to perform a membership inference attack against a global model trained using a federated learning-based approach, it has been proposed to train the attack model using a shadow model trained with a shadow training dataset. Overall, a shadow model is a machine learning model which aims at reflecting the behavior of the target model in classifying the given samples. Therefore, to train a shadow model, we need a shadow dataset that should have a similar distribution with respect to the target training dataset. For example, a shadow training dataset can be obtained by exploiting synthetic data generation techniques or by using a publicly available dataset, which should be as similar as possible to the target training dataset. So once we obtained our shadow model, we can train the attack model by analyzing the shadow model's behavior while classifying as members or non-members the data samples in the shadow training dataset. Here, the intuition is that since both the shadow model and the target model are trained with samples that share a similar data distribution, the attack model trained considering the behavior of the shadow model in classifying members and non-members data samples would be also effective for the target model. Okay, now we will see step by step how the attacker trains the attack model using a shadow model and a shadow training dataset in order to perform a membership inference attack. At very first, the attacker splits the shadow training dataset in two parts, the shadow member dataset and the shadow non-member dataset, and then uses the labeled data in the shadow member dataset to train the shadow model. Then each raw data sample in both the shadow member dataset and shadow non-member dataset is provided to the shadow model for classification. While processing each input, the attacker observes the behavior of the shadow model in classifying it. In particular, given an input X provided to the shadow model, the attacker extracts some classification parameters like the prediction confidence, the output of each layer of the shadow model while processing the sample X, the classification loss, and finally the gradients of the loss with respect to each parameter of the shadow model. These values are encoded in a feature vector that is labeled as a member if it originally belongs to the shadow member set, and the non-member if it originally belongs to the shadow non-member set. So the feature vectors labeled as members are then stored in the members training vector set, while the ones labeled as non-members are collected in the non-members training vector set. And this procedure is executed for all the samples in the shadow member and shadow non-member sets. And finally, the members and the non-members features vector sets are used to train the attack model in order to infer the membership probability of the given samples. So in our work, we propose to exploit that attack model to derive high-level properties about specific subjects from a global model trained using a federated-based approach. In particular, we investigated two research questions. The first one is about the user membership and consists of wondering if it is possible to infer from the global model if a specific user took part in federated learning process. And the second research question consists of studying if it is possible to infer from the global model if a certain participating user performed a specific activity. And we call this property activity membership. So in order to answer the first research question, we use the attack model to infer if a specific user contributed to train the global model. And in this scenario, we assume that the attacker knows the corresponding user for each available data sample. Then the attacker can infer that a specific subject participated in training the global model if most of the samples of that specific subject were classified as members by the attack model. Differently, in order to infer the activities membership, we use the attack model to infer if a certain user participated in training the global model with a specific activity. And in this scenario, we assume that the attacker knows both the corresponding user and the activity label for each available sample. So the attacker infers that a user participated in training the global model with a specific activity when most of the available labeled samples of that user related to the considered activity are classified as members by the attack model. Now let's start to explain the experimental setup that we used to evaluate the user's membership and the activities membership. As a dataset, we use the well-known MobiAct dataset because it includes data from a large number of subjects with respect to the other sensor-based HIR dataset. And so it is particularly appropriate to evaluate our federated learning-based system. About the considered activities, we selected walking, jumping, jogging, going upstairs, going downstairs, and sitting. And then, in order to classify those activities, we use a feed-forward deep neural network composed of 3 fully connected layers. This deep neural network was trained using a federated learning-based approach where each client trains locally the model for 10 epochs and then sends the trained model's parameters to the server that uses the well-known FedAVG algorithm to aggregate them and update the global model. And this procedure has been repeated 30 times until the global model converges. About the attack model training, we use 150 epochs, a learning rate of 0.001, and Adam as optimizer. In order to measure the probability that a given sample was part of the training dataset of the target model, we use the confidence of the attack model in classifying that sample as a member. And we will refer to this metric as the membership probability score. Precisely, a membership probability value closer to 1 indicates that our sample is likely a member, while a membership probability score closer to 0 indicates that our sample is likely a non-member. Now we go back to talk about the shadow models and the shadow datasets. As considering the specific HIR domain, the generation of a shadow dataset is particularly challenging. Indeed, different users may perform activities in different ways due to their specific physical characteristics and habits. So the data collected from different users are not independent and identically distributed. Therefore, in this scenario, it is very challenging to generate a shadow training dataset that has a very similar data distribution with respect to the target training dataset. And if the shadow training dataset is significantly different from the target training dataset, the performance of the membership inference attack degrades accordingly. So for the sake of this work, we consider a worst-case scenario in which the attacker trains the shadow model using part of the target training dataset of the global model, instead of using a shadow training dataset. Here we explain how we partitioned our dataset to train a global recognition model in a federated learning fashion, and so learn the attack model in order to infer the user's membership. At first, we randomly selected 15% of the users from the whole dataset to initialize the global model. Then we selected 42.5% of the users as a participant to federated learning, so they be part to the FL members partition. And then the remaining 42.5% of the users do not participate to federated learning process, and they are assigned to the FL non-members partition. The global model is hence trained in a federated learning fashion using the labeled data in the FL members partition. Then we train the attack model using 70% of the data from FL members partition, labeling this data as members, and 70% from the data of FL non-members partition, labeling this data as non-members. Finally, we use the remaining 30% of the data from both FL members and FL non-members partitions as a test set to evaluate if the attack model is able to discriminate between the data of the users who actually participated to train the global model and the user that did not participate. This figure shows our results about the user membership. In particular, it has been obtained by averaging for each user the membership probability score computed by the attack model on his test samples. We can observe that the blue bars that indicate members users that actually participated in federated learning model training are associated with a high average membership probability score that is closer to 1. Differently, the red bars refer to the data of non-members users that are the ones that did not participate in training the global model, and their average membership probability score is clearly lower than to the one of members users. So we can say that using this evaluation setup, the membership inference attack enables to easily infer if a certain user participated or not in training the global model in a federated learning way. Moreover, we want to evaluate if the membership inference attack enables recognizing the membership of a user even by analyzing data samples from FL members that have not been used to actually train the global model. And here we may suppose that those data have been stolen by the attacker from the devices of some participating users after or before that they took part to train the global model. Therefore, in order to evaluate this, we consider the specific setting where the attacker has access to 15% of the data sample from 5% of the FL members. So we do not use those data to train the global model, but we add those stolen data to the test set of the attack model in order to evaluate their membership probability score. In this figure, we can see that, like previously, the average membership probability score assigned to the data of members users that are the data actually used to train the global model is closer to 1, the blue bars, while the membership probability score assigned to the data of non-members users in red is closer to 0. However, the most interesting result is about the stolen data in orange, that are those data of federated learning members users that were not used to train the global model. Indeed, their average membership probability score is closer to the one of FL members users effectively used to train the global model. So it indicates that the attacker could reveal the membership of a certain user even if he has no access to the very same data used by that user to train the global model. But the attacker can infer the membership of a user also by using some other data of that user. Finally, we use the same splitting approach proposed previously in order to understand if it is possible to determine if a certain user contributed to the federated learning pipeline with a specific activity. The figures reported in this slide show our results about the activities membership at data sample granularity. Indeed, here the x-axis indicates the membership probability score assigned by the attack model, while the y-axis describes the percentage of data having a certain membership probability score. Observing the figure on the left, which describes the membership probability score assigned to the walking samples of a given user, it is clear that the attack is effective for this activity, as most of the non-members data has been classified as non-members. Here, indeed, their membership probability score is closer to zero, while most of the members' data has a membership probability score closer to 1, which indicates that they were classified as actual members. On the contrary, the figure on the right shows that there is not a clear difference between the membership probability score assigned to members and the non-member samples of the sitting activity. For example, this figure on the right shows that the attack model assigned a membership probability score to 0.5 to a great number of both members and non-members data. A reason behind this behavior of the attack model may be related to the fact that both the FL members and the non-members users perform the sitting activity in a very similar way. And so during the training phase, the attack model cannot observe significant differences in the shadow model behavior while processing members and non-members data of this activity. So in general, we can presume that walking represents a set of activities that are likely to differ in their pattern of execution by different subjects, while sitting represents activities that have a limited variance in their execution patterns. And this may lead to conclude that the membership inference attack for this last category of activities represented by sitting is not effective, while it is effective for those in the first category represented by walking. Considering possible privacy protection approaches, we believe that these results may provide useful information on which activities may be more exposed, hence guiding, for example, the distribution of artificial noise in obfuscation strategies. However, it is important to underline that activities in the first category, like walking, are not necessarily exposed to privacy risks in general. Indeed, considering larger datasets where it is very unlikely that users perform the activities in a unique way, it is questionable if the attack would be effective as well. So, in conclusion, our preliminary results suggest that an activity recognition model trained using a federated learning strategy may actually reveal sensitive information about the participating users. However, this is only the very first step of a research direction that we intend to explore in deep in the near future. For example, at first, we want to deal with the measure limitation of this work that consists of using a subset of the actual global model dataset to train the shadow model instead of using a shadow dataset. Indeed, this assumption is not realistic since the attacker cannot actually access this information in a federated learning scenario. So we will investigate alternative strategies to train the shadow model. For example, we can use GAN to generate synthetic data, as well as unsupervised membership attack methods. Moreover, we want to investigate if the global model parameters can also reveal more specific information related to HAR, including when, where, and how a user performed a specific activity. Then we plan to study solutions based on local differential privacy with the heuristics guided by membership inference attack-based analysis, as mentioned previously in the experimental section. Finally, we also plan to evaluate other types of attack besides membership inference attack. And for example, we could use the reconstruction attack to recreate sensor patterns that may reveal medical conditions of the participating users. Or the property inference attack could be used to infer high-level properties about specific users from the global model. And that's all. Thank you.